Welcome to As the Story Grows. I'm Brian Patton. Today we welcome Project 86 frontman Andrew Schwab to the podcast. Project 86 will release Omni Part 1 this Friday. I've been a fan of Project 86 for a long time, and it was great getting to chat with Andrew and get a different perspective on the band than I got when Steven and I talked last year. Andrew talks about his first musical endeavor as a hip-hop artist, how trying the Truthless Heroes era was for him, keeping the band going, finding a new voice on Omni, and more. I loved getting to sit down and have this conversation with Andrew, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. At one point, you had moved to Colorado for like a job at a church. Is that still where you're at?
No, I've been in Southern California the last almost 6 years.
What brought moving back there?
I mean, it was not meant to be a permanent thing.
Oh.
It was kind of like family related that we went out there to help with some stuff.
Gotcha.
And it was meant to be a year or two, and it ended up being, I think 2.5 years when we moved back. But honestly, it was just missing Southern California, the weather, because I've lived here most of my life. So you get spoiled. I grew up near Lake Erie in Western Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah.
Which is a crazy amount of snow.
Yeah.
And when I ended up in Southern California, again, moving with family, it was like, oh my gosh, this weather. We go to school outside. And so I've been spoiled by that for like 3 decades. Yeah. So then we moved back to kind of cold, and I was like, this is a great idea from a novelty standpoint, but not that fun anymore. Yeah. After about 3 months of it.
Yeah. I'm sure. What was growing up in Pennsylvania like?
Oh man, I grew up in a really small town. It was very rural. I joke with people and tell them that I grew up in the woods, which isn't that far from the truth. We had an acre of land, and all of our neighbors had an acre of land. And if you were to, use Google Earth and zoom into the street view of my house, you can't even see it because there's so many trees. So we had woods behind our house where my dad would hunt. We had a lake 150 paces down the road where we would fish. And it was a very quiet life. Yeah. Yeah. How
old were you when you moved to California?
I was 16. You
were 16?
Yeah, junior in high school.
Nice. Was it just work that took your family out there?
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I was 15. And it was not my junior year, my sophomore year. It was my junior year when we moved to Mission Viejo. We actually moved, let's see here. When we first moved to Southern California, it was for a work opportunity. Mm-hmm. And at that point, my parents are split, and they split when I was very young. So I had lived with my dad in Pennsylvania until I reached high school age. Mm-hmm. And then, to be frank, I was like, man, it would be really cool to not live in the woods. So my mom actually lived in a suburb of Baltimore, and I ended up moving to Maryland. We lived there for about a year, and then a new job opportunity came in Southern California. But it wasn't like cool Southern California. It was this town called Victorville, which is in the high desert on the way to Vegas if you're driving there from LA or Orange County. Really not cool place to live, and not what you would think in terms of Southern California. Yeah. Where are you from, Brian?
Just the suburbs of DC.
DC. Okay, so where I was living in Maryland is not far from where you were, and that's a specific culture. And when we moved out here, it was culture shock. Yeah. And the high desert was, I don't know how to explain it, man. Imagine 25-mile-an-hour winds all the time. And just being on the edge of society in a Mad Maxian nightmare state kind of thing. And anyone who's lived there would probably articulate it the same way. Yeah. There's a kind of a joke about the high desert for people who both live there and don't live there in Southern California. So we lived there for a year, and then another job situation changed, and we ended up in Mission Viejo, which is like the pinnacle of I don't know, SoCal suburban living. It's beautiful, but like, again, another culture shock. So,
yeah. What got you into music?
That's a great question. When I was young, I grew up as an only child. And I think if I wasn't an only child, I probably wouldn't have ended up doing what I do.
Yeah.
Again, I gave you the scenario. We lived a pretty quiet life in the woods.
Yeah.
And both my dad and my stepmom were pretty quiet people. And I was always pretty expressive and inquisitive, and I guess scholastic. I was really into school. I was also really into sports. I'm not the most outgoing social person, but I definitely grew up in an environment where it was like me and only me with my imagination when I was a kid. So very first song I remember ever loving was Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. And then my stepdad actually exposed me to a ton of like classic rock music, Led Zeppelin, and I remember listening to them a ton. I also remember listening to a ton of Styx, which is really funny, because they're the opposite of what you would think of being cool. But I remember being 4 and 5 years old and jamming to like Styx and Led Zeppelin and all these other bands when we were in the car. And I was always on these long drives going back and forth between parents, because they live about 6 hours away from one another.
Wow.
So a ton of music in in early childhood. And then the first record that really got me was Run DMC's Raising Hell, which I think I was in 5th grade. I loved that record. And then the first time I ever loved a band, like actually the band, was when License to Ill dropped by the Beastie Boys.
That's cool.
So when I got a little older, started getting into metal, everybody loved Metallica.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends that were into, pick a metal band from the 80s. We all listened to it and, wore the t-shirts and all the stuff. So I always kind of liked the stuff that was a little bit more, I guess, extreme for music, even back then in junior high.
Yeah.
Whether it was, super heavy metal or Yo MTV Raps, that was cool back then, to listen. That was alternative music back in the 80s, late 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get to California in high school, are you just like, is that a moment where you can like re-envision who you are as a person and like how people view you and like trying to pick your routine or whatever?
Yeah. That was the thing that I learned, because I went to 4 different high schools. Right. I started in Maryland and then went to 2 different schools in Victorville. I remember when we got to Victorville, the public high school was so crazy, gnarly, dangerous.
Oh, man.
That my parents put me in a private school. So I ended up going to like a private Christian school. And I grew up Catholic, but back then, like, I didn't really think about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I just remember thinking, man, this is so lame, because there was like 100 kids in this whole school, the whole high school.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, next semester, just throw me in with the Wolves. Ended up going to the public school, which ended up being fine.
Yeah.
I didn't get killed, obviously. And then, by the time that I ended up at Mission Viejo, it was my 4th reinvention.
Wow.
In 3 years. So I kind of started embracing being the new guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At what point were you looking at like, all right, I need to start a band?
I started dabbling in music as a direct result of my stepdad being a musician when I was a freshman in high school. We had a very unique situation because we lived in this pretty big house, and we had an extra bedroom. So the front of house engineer for his band rented a room from us. So not only did I have access to a musician, but I had access to a sound guy with a ton of gear. So my friends and I would make demos in our rooms, and man, oh gosh, you talk about like blackmail material. Oh gosh, I have some old stuff, videos and demos, and it was amazing. We actually started a rap group. Again, this is 14-year-old me. We called ourselves Da White Posse.
Oh my God.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that like the best? I kind of want to revisit that a little bit just because of the band name.
Oh man, that's wild.
So we were just we all loved the Beastie Boys and watched Yo MTV Raps and all that stuff. And that was a very short-lived era. But that was my first sort of foray into music. I got a turntable. We got records. We did the tape dubbing where you would make beats, where you would, it was a lot of work. But rewind and press pause and re-record and all that, tape dubbing to make beats. And we had this little demo that we made and passed it around school and stuff. And it actually wasn't that bad. At first, we were really bad. But as we did it more and more, it got a little bit better. And I remember, hanging around some people actually kind of being impressed. And I was really into basketball back then. I showed it to some of the guys on the team. And this one friend of mine was like, my cousin's a DJ. And he does a lot of stuff in Baltimore and DC. You guys should hook up. I think you would do really well together. He was like doing legit stuff. Yeah. Because I used to get a ton of flack because I was like the white kid, trying to rap, you know what I mean? But I actually could do it, believe it or not. And so it was right on the brink of like almost becoming something beginning of my sophomore year. And then we moved. And that was like the earth shattering death chapter of my life at that time. I thought my life was over because we were leaving all this. I had a girlfriend. I was on the basketball team. I was going to make a record, you know what I mean? At least in my brain. Yeah. So that was the beginning.
No, man. What was that transition from like wanting to be a hip hop artist to like fronting a rock band?
Oh, when I moved to Southern California, I kind of let all that stuff go. Yeah. You talk about like reinventing yourself. By the time I reached Mission Viejo, I didn't even think about any of that. I still enjoyed hip hop music, but I also really liked rock and metal. As I grew older, I the palette expanded. Yeah. Ended up, my freshman year of college, I ended up going to junior college in Southern California. So I stayed in the area that we lived. And we had a very vibrant scene back then. And it was kind of emerging. So I was exposed to, I remember the first show that I went to, first like underground show, a friend of mine who I met at college. I ended up, this is really funny. I always did well in school. So in college, I set a goal for myself that I would never get anything but an A. And I failed. I got 1 B. And I ended up kind of tutoring a friend of mine that I knew from high school. I didn't know him very well, but he was in kind of the extended group of friends of ours in math. We were taking the same math class. Yeah. And I ended up getting together with him often to tutor him. And he ended up inviting me to a show. And we went and saw this band called Plank Eye. And opening for them, I think it was 4 or 5 bands on the bill, was a band called Focused. And I had never gone to like shows in my life, up to that point. I really wasn't old enough. My parents were never going to let me go to stuff like that before I was 18. Gotcha. So I hadn't been exposed to shows at all. I always dreamed of going to them. And so that was the first underground show I ever went to. And I remember just wide-eyed because, there's 300 or 400 kids in this room. And it was legit. And I remember looking up at what Focused was playing. They were one of the bands that I really liked back then. They were one of the first bands I liked from that whole scene. I remember looking up there and going, I could do that. I could do that. And I could do it really well. And I just felt that like pull. You know what I mean? The fire was lit. And within a very short time, the way I was explaining to people is it's not something I wanted to do. It's not something I was going to try to do. It was something I was doing. Yeah. Like I had to do it. It was so like close to my heart, And of course, like all of these other memories leading up to that, being exposed to music and being able to dabble with it and kind of being in the right place at the right time, living with a sound engineer and a musician and, that was kind of the foundation. Yeah. And I was a huge fan because I had nothing else to do, man. I was alone. I was either playing sports out in the yard, backyard football games, shooting hoops, going to my sporting events or listening to music, nerding out over lyrics, imagining myself on stage. Yeah. That doesn't happen if you have, siblings and you live in a happening suburbia. You get distracted by other stuff going on.
Talk to me about Project 86 and how this band gets started.
I think it was 1994, and it was shortly after. I went to that first show and I wanted more, so I just started going to shows and started making friends and started meeting people. And the first connection that I made was this guy named Alex. He was the first real connection in terms of assembling a band. Mm-hmm. And that was like 94. And he was just starting to play drums, and he was in high school. I think he was like a sophomore or a junior in high school. He was pretty young. And we met through a mutual friend at a show. And then it was about as simple as we should start a band. Yeah. He had never been in a band. I had never been in a band. And that was it. And we went out and tried to recruit people to play. We actually formed a band briefly, like a hardcore band. Yeah. One of the guys that was a part of that ended up being in the band Unashamed, but I think he was only at a few of the band practices. We only had like 2 or 3 band practices. And all the guys lived far apart, and we were all super young. And, some of the guys didn't have cars and gear and all that. So I remember we were actually booked, putting my fingers in the air, quotes, to open for Focused, which was like a huge, big deal for us back then at age 18 or whatever we were. I mean, I was 18, Alex was like 15, I think. And we ended up not doing that show because we didn't have enough songs. So we had like 1.5 songs.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And so out of that project, though, we didn't even have a name. Yeah. That was kind of the foundation for Project 86. It was just a matter of finding, the right guys to jam with. Yeah. And wanted to take it seriously. I always wanted to take it seriously. It's like, if we're going to do this, let's do something with it. Let's not be, one of 18,000 bands that, are flakes and we have a few band practice, play a few shows, and then break up. I only wanted to work with, and Alex agreed. I only wanted to work with guys who were going to take it seriously. So it took a couple of years to find the right people. Yeah. And then in 96, we started practicing. And it took a little while to, get the material together. But after about 6 months of writing songs, we booked our first show. And that was in Mission Viejo, California. We were actually opening for the band Stavesacre. So, a lot of great memories wrapped up in that era, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Where'd the name come from? We couldn't think of a name, so we would just refer to it as, our project or the project. And then, as was cool back around that time, we thought, let's just put a number after the word project, which so many bands were doing around that time. And the number 86, I don't know. I don't remember where the number came from. Obviously, the reference is, when you reject or throw something out. We just thought Project 86 sounded good, and then we sort of twisted the meaning of being 86 a little bit when we were asked to say, oh, we're just trying to do our own thing, whether we're, quote, accepted or rejected. Mm-hmm. That was kind of there wasn't a ton of thought put into it. Yeah. It was just like, that sounds cool. Let's roll with that. When people ask what it means, we'll kind of leave it vague. Yeah. Kind of thing. Yeah. And that was like an era where like people put a lot of focus on like, especially Christian bands, their name meaning something. It's like, it just sounds cool. Yeah. And that was kind of the philosophy early on with a lot of the decisions that we made. Oh, if it sounds cool, let's do that. Yeah. We really didn't overthink a lot of things in the early days. That's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. What kind of drove your sound, especially on like that first record of like
I mean, you were doing hardcore previously, and that was like your inspiration for starting this. But what led to kind of this more post-hardcore sound? One of the things that's always boggled me is how like Project got lumped into nu metal, and I was like, oh, they're a post-hardcore band, but like,
yeah, that's. I think of what's the best way to summarize that whole thing.
Yeah.
I liked the merger of, you know, the hip hop and the metal or the hard rock or whatever. And back then it was still kind of cool.
Yeah.
You know, you had a band like Downset that was basically a hardcore band, but they rapped, you know, and even the band Focused had a song where there was like rapping on it.
Yeah.
So like when that whole thing first started, it wasn't convoluted, you know, it hadn't become this popular thing yet. And it was still quote unquote cool.
Yeah.
So when we first started, it was like, yeah, we like Deftones. We like, obviously everybody liked Rage Against the Machine. Like I loved that band, you know? And when we first started, it was like unintentionally, oh, we're a Rage cover band, you know? and you know, once we got a little feedback, it was like, oh, we can't do that. You know, we went too far. And I take responsibility for that because I loved that band. Yeah. You know, we had to learn a lot of lessons. I had to learn a lot of lessons. It's about like, you know, it's important to have your own voice, your own sound, you know. We definitely all sort of came out of that same scene, but we wanted to do something that was maybe looking beyond that scene a little bit. I don't know that we ever talked about or had an aspiration to like sign to a major label or anything like that, but we wanted to do a little bit more quote unquote commercial sound, I guess. So taking some of those roots of coming out of that world and then mixing it in with this sort of emerging sound. It wasn't nu metal yet. There were only like 3 or 4 bands doing it, and they were all cool. Deftones was cool, you know, when they dropped Adrenaline. And I mean, they're still cool, but what I'm saying is it was just a handful of bands, you know. I guess Tool was a part of that too, even though they weren't like rapping or anything. Yeah. You know? But yeah, the nu metal thing, part of that was marketing, you know, because that sound started to emerge. Part of that was we were sort of coming up under POD. Yeah. You know, and part of that, from there, it sort of steamrolled. You know, we ended up, you know, only playing with those kinds of bands. And that was kind of one of the things that we really struggled with. It's like, we want to come up with bands that, you know, that we're fans of. Not saying that we disliked any of the bands we were touring with, but like we always imagined ourselves being a part of like a different circuit of bands than where we ended up. You know, there were a lot of things that unfolded along the way that if you had it to do over again, you know, hindsight's always 20. Yeah, right. You know, you'd be a little bit more intentional about certain things. So we weren't that intentional about anything really until later on. You know, really up until the 3rd record. And even then we were just still pretty young and trying to figure things out. Yeah, that time frame of music, it went from very quickly being like heavy music, where it's like if you listen to POD and Project and Zayo and Dextol all in the same breath, it was like, yeah, of course, they're all the same genre of music. And then it was very subdivided into genre very quickly in the 2000s. Yeah, exactly. You know, you used to be able to, because there weren't as many bands, you know, you just throw, you know, bands of different sounds together and there's a tour package or there's a show and kids would come out because it's all from the same kind of world, you know. But as more and more people start making music, you know, then you have greater division between the little subgenres and such. Yeah. What led you guys to Tooth and Nail Records? That's an interesting question. I think it was an inevitability because we were all fans of that scene. So we were going to all the shows and, you know, we had a lot of relationships within that world with everyone from, you know, the Supertones guys that we all ended up going to church with. The friend that I referenced who took me to the first show was the drummer for the Supertones, Jason. I guess, yeah. And all of the guys in the band were really close with him. So I know he was one of the people kind of throwing stuff out, and the other guys in that band. I know the guys in Stavesacre were a part of kind of mentioning it to Tooth and Nail. And yeah, we had made enough friends in that world that it kind of became sort of, it just made sense, you know. Yeah. I remember we played Tom Fest in '97, and I remember giving the demo to Brandon, and him saying, "Oh yeah, I heard about you guys." And we were like, "Whoa, cool. That's awesome." And it just sort of happened. There were other labels who were interested, but that was kind of always the place where we wanted to land.
Yeah. What was the pitch for BEC and you guys being on this new imprint that, like, I mean, it's now like a full-on worship label, but
yeah,
like, at the time it was like Joy Electric, Project A6, the Supertones, and Pep Squad. Like, what is that?
So you talk about, hindsight being 2020 and like not really having a lot of intention. We didn't know what we're doing. We didn't know anything. So one of the things that happened when we signed to Tooth and Nail was Brandon made it pretty evident to us that he was the only one who wanted to sign us. That the rest of the staff was not into signing our band.
Oh no.
So he mentioned that several times to us when we were signing to the label. So I think there was an idea in our heads because we were already trying to do something different, right? We didn't want to just be tied to one kind of scene. As much as we liked the Tooth and Nail scene back then, we always imagined like doing something, hopefully, maybe that would make the band, transcend that or be, we wanted to be a big band, So all we said to him was, what's going to give us the opportunity to be the biggest band that we can be? And he said, well, we're doing this BEC thing. It's meant to be a little bit more commercial. And we're like, okay, that sounds great. But it was never mentioned to us like that was meant to be like commercial Christian.
Yeah.
Like worship. That was just kind of lost. Or maybe it was, we just didn't get it or something. But in hindsight, of course, we would have not chosen to. We should have done the solid state thing for sure. Yeah. For sure. We just didn't get it. We just didn't understand, and we didn't think about it. We're just like, oh, we get to put out a record, That's it.
I think I asked Steven this when he was on the pod, but when you guys were recording and writing Drawing Black Lines, did you know like that there was like lightning in a bottle there, that this was going to be a thing that was going to catch fire?
Not really. It was very organic. It happened fast. I think there might have been a conversation at some point or just a natural evolution saying, let's do something a little bit more energetic, maybe a little bit more aggressive. But we weren't sitting in meetings together, crafting the sound or anything. Yeah. I know Steve came in with a lot of fresh ideas on that record, and we had all there were other factors involved. I think that helped contribute to that. And I've thought about this a lot over the years. I've always been a little bit, I've worn the analytical hat inside the band. That's been my job, I guess, or my role. We had come off the tour with POD and Blindside, the Warriors tour, and that was a really good tour. And POD was just signed to Atlantic, so they had a lot of hype going. And I think there was like some healthy competition that really emerged. I mean, I don't think, excuse me. I know. we would go on stage every night and try to match their show or beat them. That was the goal. I mean, in a healthy way, not in a jerky kind of way, like that healthy competition between brothers kind of thing. So I think that lit the fire for us because we saw a lot of the big things that were happening around them, and we were kind of saying, why not us? Yeah. And then when we found out Garth was going to produce the record, which was a contact that Tooth and Nail had made through him doing the Supertones record, we were like, okay, we have to bring our A game. Yeah. This is going to new places. So I think some of that, healthy competition fire. I think we felt like we had a better record in us. The first record was, for what it was, it did very well. I don't think it's aged as well as some of the other music. Yeah. But we had like a core audience now, but we just wanted to do something that was a little bit more upbeat because it was a droney kind of sound minus pipe dream. Yeah. It was a really kind of a slow record. And I think we just all felt like we could take it to the next level. Seeing it happen to our friend's band, we're like, we can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the vibe. And so it was just it was a lot of contributing little things. I think that none of us were really thinking about that analytically, probably besides me. And I wasn't really even thinking about it that much.
Yeah.
And it was fun. We were having fun making heavy music. Garth definitely made it heavier. The production approach makes a difference. The way it was mixed, it all was the right chemistry. We didn't take much time recording it either. I mean, it was a rush job. I wrote a lot of those lyrics in the hotel room before I walked to the studio, and I didn't even know what I was doing. I'm listening to the track and I'm like, I don't know what to do here. I remember taking the other guy's CD books and like listening to songs, trying to get ideas, just random bands that I had never heard of. And, I was like, oh, this looks cool. Let's listen to this. And then I would, okay. And then just get the ideas like that. I'm listening to random Swedish rock bands and Weezer and all kinds of different stuff. And wrote a lot of those songs in the studio, basically, nice. Or in the hotel.
Yeah.
I didn't say that to anyone.
Sure. Yeah.
I just, I think guys in the band knew, but I didn't say that to Garth or anything. I was like, yeah, just come up with that an hour ago. I've done that a lot throughout my career, just kind of coming up with stuff on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah. Hindsight being what it is, like, aside from just oversaturation of the market, what do you think went wrong with Atlantic and Truthless Heroes?
That's a whole episode.
Well, because I think of all the Project 86 records, that one I think people have warmed the most to over time, where people are like,
right.
Oh, we judged too harshly. This is a good record. And so
if you go back through the catalog, there's been moments where we kind of took a left turn, more than one. And that was the first left turn. One of the things that was talked about inside the band was we don't want to be Limp Bizkit. We don't want to be associated with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because that had become really, like you said, saturated. And we could tell it had a short shelf life.
Yeah, it got toxic really fast too.
Yeah,
people were
Woodstock 99 killed it, basically. Or started to kill it. So there was intention there. And, the next question was, well, where do we go? Mm-hmm. And it was always like, well, let's just see what happens. And what happened was more of like a rock sound. And there was specific pressure from the outside to deliver commercial material. And the pressure came from behind the scenes. It wasn't necessarily directly from A&R. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't like, John or A&R was always very supportive. He was a cheerleader for the band. He just wanted us to succeed, So whatever we could do to succeed, but he also knew the system. And it was like, hey, we got to give the upper level people something they can feel strong about marketing.
Yeah.
So that became the emphasis, whether it was talked about or not. Obviously management was pushing for that. We're looking at things that are happening with POD, but really the biggest pressure was we were behind the scenes trying to navigate a buyout of our contract with Tooth and Nail by Atlantic, and our attorney and our manager was trying to orchestrate that. And so that ended up being a kind of a difficult situation for us because we were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. But it was definitely said to me on the phone. Like, a lot of the other guys weren't in on some of these calls. I know Alex was, but the other two guys, they didn't really want anything to do with all the politicking and stuff. And I don't blame them. That stuff will ruin you.
Right.
And it was said to us, on several occasions by our attorney and by our manager, if you guys don't deliver, some big songs, they're not going to buy you out of your deal. So that pressure was there for sure. And I think just all the politics started to kind of wear on us a little bit. My response was like, okay, I want to, the only thing I have like a say over in this situation is like the lyrical concept. So I want to go deeper and tell a story or grand concept or a world or whatever. And and I really think if it had been mixed differently, it really would have been kind of a different story. And if Spy Hunter was the first song, it would have been a different story. Hindsight's 20/20, man.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we could have done differently. everything happens for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
I don't, there was a very long time after that, because I wouldn't say things fell apart, but we definitely, like, the fans did not receive that record that well.
No. Yeah.
I would say 2/3 of our fans waved goodbye because it was a different sound. I mean, Drawing Black Lines was a well-received record. It had a great energy to it. It was dark but positive at the same time. It was unique in the context. I hope I'm not, like, touting it too much, but, like, I was really stoked on Drawing Black Lines.
Yeah.
I really loved that record. I loved that it was really heavy.
Yeah.
For the time, especially.
Yeah.
So Truthless Heroes was hard. It was hard to write. It took us 18 months, I think, to do it. Like, we had to have, like, finished demos with vocals, and I never did that, really.
Yeah.
A little bit, but, I like kind of writing in the studio, typical procrastinator, frontman, with that stuff, especially on certain records. Yeah, and I do like a lot of the music on Truthless Heroes.
Yeah.
But the memories are convoluted for me. So it's hard. When I think about it, my heart kind of sinks a little, because there's all the what might have beens, which over time you kind of realize things went the way they were supposed to go. But there's also just the mistakes or the painful parts of it. It was like, oh, if we just would have put Spinner first,
Yeah.
And I don't know why, to this day, like, I think we had all these shiny new toys in the forms of newer songs, and the emphasis was giving the label what they wanted. Spy Hunter was kind of an afterthought. It was an older song by then. We wrote it the late part of the Drawing Black Lines album cycle. And, no one was excited about that song, but the fans would have been, and I think it would have given a different impression on Truthless Heroes. And probably if I would have abandoned too much emphasis on the concept stuff. And,
Right.
You know what I mean? Just pick the best songs and put them in the right order, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that demo for Spy Hunter that ended up on Solid State Volume 3, people were like, oh, Project is going to crush it. And then it was like the wait for Truthless Heroes. And then it was like, where's the song we all like?
Right. And Garth produced that one, which is why it sounded more like Drawing Black Lines.
Yeah.
You see, production and mixing and even mastering, it makes a big difference. That's something that we've experienced over the years, good and bad. Can make or break material.
Yeah.
For sure.
One last disguise.
As members of Project have left the band, and as you come to the end of Picket Fence Cartel and it's just you there, were there conversations you had with people or something that made you keep going? Or was there a moment where you're like, all right, I guess the band is done now?
Yeah, there was a lot of wrestling with all of that for many years, because after Truthless Heroes, things started to fracture, creatively, and guys, you get older, you become adults, and you want to do other things, which is totally fair. And that happens to a lot of bands. I don't know if I ever even imagined myself doing it nearly as long as I have music itself. It's really just always been kind of a record to record kind of decision. And it's not been an easy one for me personally, because I think from the day that I graduated college and sat down with my mom, and she said to me point blank, like, why are you choosing this? You can do anything with your life, and be good at it. Why are you choosing this? And my answer was just, I want to do something that makes a difference in people's lives. And I love this. I just love it. It's not about making money. It's not about any of that stuff. If it's done well, we'll make a living, and that's it. But I have to do this. Yeah. So I've always questioned it, though. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Should I go be an accountant? That kind of thing. And with, OG lineup evolving out of the band, it was like a 4 or 5 year period where guys were kind of easing out of the band. Alex being first, Randy being second, Steve being third. And it's all sort of part and parcel of the same idea of just moving ahead in life. It got to that turning point, and I had a decision to make, and there was a lot of self-doubt in that. Yeah. It's like, okay, I'm going to take on a lot more responsibility in terms of, the music in addition to the lyrics and vocal.
Yeah.
Am I up for this challenge? And I think that's the thing that, regardless of, because I knew that, some people weren't going to like that, obviously the guys that were in the band probably were not going to like that. And, certain segments of the fan base might not like that, and maybe it won't work, but I really liked the challenge of like taking on more of the creative responsibility, and kind of proving mostly to myself, that I could do that.
Yeah.
Not to say like I'm sitting down with a guitar or anything like that. I don't play guitar, I don't play drums. But sitting down with new input and, driving the conversation a little bit, and then, having others execute those ideas, but really being closely linked to that. I think, as time went on, in the early stages of the project, I was always in the room when we were writing the music, but as time went on, I was less and less involved with riffs and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was something that I desired to be a part of, again. So I think that was the biggest thing for me is the challenge of it. And it was scary for sure, and it was scary going forward without those guys. And it was always mixed emotions about it, because I knew that, not everyone was going to agree with the decision. Yeah. And still there are a lot of people to this day that don't. Yeah. But like, I don't know, this thing started, this thing was an idea in my brain that I was pursuing for a couple of years before the band actually started. So I've always viewed it as kind of like, as much as other guys have contributed along the way and been a part of it, just as much a part of it, it was always kind of like a thing that I started, know? And so I guess that combined with the challenge is like, why not? Let's give this a shot and see what happens.
Were there things you had seen that had changed in the music industry by the time you get to Wait for the Sirens that chose you to go independently on that record versus when you were independent with Songs to Burn Your Bridges By?
Yeah, it was more possible. Going the Orthodox label route when we started was kind of the only route. And as more and more time has gone on, and it's really technology that's made it possible for artists to release their own music and distribute their own music and market their own music. When you're signed to a label, it's a trade-off. You're giving them most of the money in order to make your band bigger, and to give you a bigger fan base. And we were in a unique position, really, since relatively early on, that we had a pretty loyal fan base. And Picket Fence Cartel was kind of a hybrid deal where a lot of the responsibility kind of fell on us, for better or worse. I personally learned a lot of lessons on that record about what to do and what not to do, and really every record since. But it was an evolution, sort of, just as, the member changes along the way, or the lineup changes, was kind of an evolution over a period of time. The evolution towards being able to do it a little bit more independently was also learning lessons over a period of time. And it kind of came to that point where it just made the most sense. We still, on that record, we partnered with distributors. Yeah. So that, and we had a marketing team, and, we just kind of became our own label to release our own stuff.
You've been doing Project 86 a long time. You've seen not just the Christian music industry, but the music industry completely flip. What has been the thing for you, especially in the later stages of your career, that have been like wild to witness, especially as like Christian music as a scene and genre has kind of dissolved, really? Like,
right. You have to, and this has become increasingly so, you have to do more and more work to achieve the same or less results.
Yeah.
The amount of knowledge that you have to have of algorithms and Google and YouTube and Spotify and such, there's a ton of admin that needs to happen behind the scenes in the digital sense. And really the thing that flipped the script on the music industry, besides the digital music phenomenon in the early 2000s, was social media.
Yeah.
Now you can market yourself for free to fans, but also because people have access to public figures through social media, the expectations changed and attention spans got shorter, and it just changed everything. It destroyed, I think, something that was an earmark of rock music for many decades, and that was mystique. Yeah. It really ruined that. And I think not in a good way, because as a music fan, I always loved the fact that you had to fill in the blanks with your imagination as to who these guys were that were making the music. And you really just had a piece of album art, maybe something in a booklet, some lyrics, and the music, and maybe some interviews to refer to. But there was so much gap between the music fan and the people making the music that it left room for the imagination. And that's something that we've lost increasingly in recent time, and I really kind of lament that on a regular basis. That's the biggest thing, is the death of mystique, and really, the fact that you have to stay in people's faces for the most part, unless you're really special, people will forget about you and move on if you don't stay in their faces and post regularly. You never had to do that. I definitely, I'm an old guy saying this, but I miss the days when you could print up the flyers, go to shows, hand them out, and people would show up to your show because there was nothing else going on. Right. Where you would go and you would play a random town, and you might not draw 1 million people the first time you play there, but some people are going to come out just to check out the band because there's a band playing in town. None of that happens anymore. Yeah. Obviously. Yeah. I mean, I talked to someone the other day, and it's like talking about like VFW hall shows, and just like, as a local band, it's like, all right, band X is coming through. If we can just get on the bill and play 3 songs, we're good. Like, or just like, even as a fan going to shows where it's like, there's a show at the VFW hall every night of the week. We can go see hardcore every night. Like, that doesn't. And that's what we did. We would go to shows every weekend, sometimes 2 on a weekend. Yeah. And it was a lot of the same bands. Yeah. And I loved that. And, again, you didn't have as many options. And that is kind of the curse of where we're at in civilization now. It's unlimited options. Yeah. Has the touring kind of changed, especially as like, it seems like church shows don't really happen anymore like they did in the late 90s, early 2000s? That's an interesting question. Of course it has. When the band was first starting, it wasn't lame to play a show at a church, and as the band grew, we didn't want to do that anymore. because it wasn't as cool. And then there was a chapter in the band where we didn't do any of that at all, any of the Christian festivals or churches or anything. And then I think over time it just got harder and harder to do it at all. So you kind of open the door back up to doing that kind of stuff. Ever since the early days, I don't think anyone who's involved with the band preferred to do those types of shows. Yeah. But if we got an offer there, on a Wednesday and we needed to fill the date, we would do it. Always prefer to play You play Columbus, Ohio, you want to play Scully's, But as far as the greater question of touring evolving and such, we've seen a resurgence in recent history, I think, of people desiring to get out to live shows, especially post-pandemic times.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And we've also seen a resurgence of heavy music, which is really great. Some of these bands that have been doing it for years are bigger than they've ever been. I mean, look at the crowds that Meshuggah is playing for these days.
Right. Yeah.
So we've seen some resurgence over time of the live venue performance, but I think with the advent again of more options, going out to a show isn't the only game in town. So it's a little bit more challenging to get people out of their houses, off their phones, and out to a real performance. I think that's the biggest evolution. It's kind of similar to the changes in the music industry.
Why now to end the band?
That's a great question. The feeling that I had pre-pandemic was what else is there to accomplish? Where else is there to go creatively? That's always kind of the biggest question, because when it comes down to it, it's a lot of work to make music. I mean, of course you can just sit down and slap something together. And I think we had the benefit of not having done it so many times early on, but the further you go, the more you have to be aware of what you've done previously, at least for project. There's always been an importance or an emphasis placed upon reinvention. We've reinvented ourselves a lot along the way because that's fun. It's fun to try new stuff. So that was a little bit of the pull in me. And then really, to be totally honest and candid, as I've gotten older, I've had this increasing sense of anxiety about the way that I sing. Okay. And it's not unfounded. When we made Truthless Heroes, not a lot of people know this, but when we made Truthless Heroes, I actually got a vocal cord nodule when I was in the studio. This was really dumb looking back on it again, hindsight 2020. Right before we started recording vocals, right? So we go back to Truthless Heroes era. We're in the studio, we finished the instruments, it's time to sing, and I don't remember whose idea it was, but the idea was, let's go to Vegas for the weekend. So we go to Vegas, and I was in those casinos with the smoke and the bad air all weekend. Came back and caught some bug, and it was laryngitis. I'd never had laryngitis my entire life. Went in day one to sing, and my voice didn't work. Like, I would try to go into the Schwab shout voice, and it would crack. And I'm like, something's wrong, man. And so instead of stopping, I sang harder.
No.
And I still couldn't make it work. And then I felt something kind of break in my throat.
Oh.
And that from there started a really, you asked me why Truthless Heroes is so hard for me to memorize. This is one of the reasons. It started a really, really difficult chain of events for me, involving, I was already going to a vocal coach. The label had suggested that, and I really wanted to go to learn how to not lose my voice. Yeah. Losing my voice is always an issue. So I went to the voice coach, sang. He's like, I think you have a nodule. And then he sent me to a voice doctor. So it was really funny because I'm going to the celebrity vocal coach, celebrity voice doctor, and they're telling me, the voice coach works with Chris Cornell and Maynard and all these people. And then I'm going to the doctor, and he's like, yeah, Ozzy was just in here before you, and it was just what kind of weird world am I in?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the weird thing of going to the majors, the major label world.
Yeah.
You got to like kind of be around all that stuff, which was really magical.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stories from that era that are really cool. But I, from there, I had to go to a speech therapist, for weeks. I had to go on voice rest for so we're trying to tour on a record after that, and I'm trying to finish making a record. And like, they're telling me, you got to do this, you got to do that. And for about 6 months, I'm going to doing all this stuff and it's not working. The nodule's getting worse and worse and worse. Finally, I had a surgery scheduled where it was like they were going to surgically remove this bump on my vocal cord. And I don't know why I decided not to do it. It was definitely the right thing in hindsight because it's a very risky surgery. And you can permanently damage your voice with scar tissue if it's not done correctly, or if you don't heal from it correctly. So I decided not to do it because of the risk. And I'm like, I'm just going to figure it out and let the chips fall. And so I had been operating for a long time, since like 2003, 2004, with the thought in mind that I was damaging my voice more and more and more and more. Mm-hmm. I had been told by people close to me, family members, that my speaking voice was starting to get raspier and raspier over time. There were some times on the road and in the studio where I lost my voice really bad and had to go on voice rest again for like 6 weeks. I don't know if you've ever had to go on voice rest, but it's not very fun.
I'd imagine not.
It's super isolating because you can't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
For like a month or 6 weeks at a time, like probably 8 different times throughout my career, I've had to do that. And you just feel alone and terrified, and it's hard. So I didn't go to the doctor again for like almost 20 years.
Wow.
And I'm operating with this thought in mind. I'm getting older. I'm going to reach a point that like I can't sing anymore like this. So that was the biggest thing in my mind going into like making this announcement. It's like, okay, I'm not revealing my age on this podcast. I never tell people my age, but you can do, I've been doing 27 years. I started when I was in college. So you can do the math.
Yeah.
I'm pretty old, right? Comparatively speaking to most dudes in this game. Although there are a lot of great bands, I think, in heavy music that are my age and even older. Yeah. They're still making great music. So it's not unheard of. That was the biggest thing for me is like, I probably say 70% of that decision is like, let's do this one more time. I might not, I don't even know where I'm going to end up on the other side of it. I might not have a voice at all, and, fast forward, get into writing the music, and we get to the point where I'm about to, go into the studio to record vocals with Bo Burchell, who's fantastic. I got to drop his name. One of my favorite producers. I think my favorite producer I've ever worked with over the years. He rules. Just a good dude. It was the early part of 2022. I got COVID and. Lost my voice right before going into studio, and like it was not coming back, dude. Like it hurt. It felt like it felt when I first got the nodule.
Oh man!
So for years I've been operating with one nodule in my brain, waiting for the next one, because when you get one, it's like a callus. When your vocal cords come together, you get a bump there, and it pushes on the other one. And over time, another vocal cord nodule, and then your vocal cords can't come together at all. You either need to remove them, or you need to do some sort of therapy to, over time, get rid of them. This stuff's stressful. Yeah. So I'm finally at the point. It's a month. I had COVID. I couldn't talk. My voice hurt. It wasn't going away. I'm like, finally ruined my voice. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to sing to make this record. I'm like, I have to go to the doctor. I've been putting off going to the doctor for so long. It had been such a built-up terror in my mind. Like I took a week between the time when I made the appointment, when I went to finally get myself centered, praying on my knees every day, like, okay, I accept that my music career is over. This is, wild frontman thinking here. I'm finally to the point where I'm like, okay, I accept it. I'm done, and I go in. I went to, I did do acupuncture for a couple of weeks prior to that, because like, hoping that would help, because that does help with certain things. Finally, I'm like, okay, going to the doctor, and what they do is they put a tube up your nose and down your throat, and then they make you sing. It's really uncomfortable. Yeah. And so they do that, and then they have like a screen where you can like see your vocal cords. I'm in the doctor. She does the thing. She makes me sing. And she looks at the screen and I look at it with her. She takes that thing out of my face and she's like, "Oh, your vocal cords look perfect. You just have some residual like swelling in your throat from being sick." And like, if there was one piece of information I was not ready for, it was that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, not like the world's like spinning around me. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Okay. I'm like numb in a good way. I don't know how to, so I've been carrying this thing with me for 20 years.
Yeah.
I walk out in the street and it's like a scene from like a film, where the camera is spinning around the guy because he just found out, some piece of information.
Everything's a little brighter.
Yeah. Like, I'm like,
I'm healed.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. What am I going to, oh my gosh, I can do this, like just thanking heaven, thanking God, get in my car. I'm calling everybody I know. I'm like, dude, like I can, wow. Like, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
So shortly thereafter, I go in the studio and another thing happened. I had always wanted to make, part of me wanted Truthless Heroes to be even heavier than Drawing Black Lines. Mm-hmm. That's not the way it was going to go because of the type of the music that we needed to make for the label. Ever since then, we've been more of a rock-leaning band. Yeah. That's just the way the cookie had crumbled. I've always mentioned to people, like, when you sit in a room and you write music with people or you're working collaboratively with anyone, what comes out is the intersection of your circles, your orbits, right? And so that whatever that intersects, that's the sound. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, it's always been more of a rock. We had heavy moments, but like it was always more of a rock sound. I finally said, okay, if this is going to be the last time I do this, I want to do everything that I always wanted to do, but never did or never could or whatever. So I'm like, I want to do the heaviest stuff. I want this to be more metal. And like, I'm going to make sure that happens no matter what. Yeah. And part of that was I had been the last decade at our live show, maybe even more. I've been evolving the way I sing, really to preserve my voice. Mm-hmm. But what was coming out in me singing later was a more growly, almost metal kind of voice. Yeah. But I'd never done it on a record. Mm-hmm. And so I knew going into it, because we dropped this Christmas song a couple seasons ago that I tried that on. It sounded good and was pretty well received. I thought, at least. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this voice in the studio, and it ended up not only sounding right for the music, but sitting in the room with Bo, and he's like, "Dude, you sound great. Like, this is the best you've ever sounded." Yeah. I'm like, I feel like I finally found my voice, and it took me 20 some years to get here. So, and then like I start showing the music to people. And Bo's sitting in the room. He's like, "Dude, this is the best stuff that's ever come out of your band." Yeah. And I'm like, we're just biased. Like, this is like, you always think that when you're in the studio. Right. Yeah. But I know how I feel in my heart when I'm listening to like Metatropolis, which was the first single that we dropped. When we finished that song, I was like, oh my gosh. He lives in Temecula. I live in Foothill Ranch. It's an hour drive. I listened to the song on repeat the drive home that day in the studio. And I'm like, oh my gosh, people are going to lose their minds when they hear this, because it's going to be, they're just not going to think, that it's even project. Yeah. The second thing that's going to happen is I'm going to get, who's the guest vocalist? Yeah. And that's been happening so much. I just laugh when that happens because it's really funny. But the music, it came out so much. And hats off to the whole crew. We got a lot of people working on this thing. Yeah. I never had such a big team of people working on a piece of music. Yeah. Big shout to everybody, from Bo to Michael Palmquist to Grayson Stewart and Corey and Matt, everybody, working on this thing. Darren, really excited about it, but you're supposed to be excited about your latest thing. But I really think this is like a better version, like a reinvention or it's a left turn in a good way, and it's something else entirely. And I don't know how to navigate that right now because it's not that I ever wanted to stop making music. It's just that I felt like I can't. Yeah. So I'm in this weird crossroads. We haven't dropped the record yet. I'm hoping that when people hear the record, they're going to be really stoked on it. There's a lot to this record. I'm doing a lot of things that I've always wanted to do. It's conceptual. It's a double album. Yeah. we're doing like a visual album / film for part 1 of the double album. I'm also I've written the first draft of like a fiction book that goes along with it. So it's meant to be kind of like an immersive experience. We're even doing a fan-driven alternate reality game that a group of our Patreon community have just taken the reins in building, which is really fun. We're not done with it yet, but that's coming down the pipe as well. Yeah, it's very exciting, and I don't know what any of it means.
Yeah. You're sitting here with this thing, and it's like, I should not have announced this was our last record.
I don't, it's not that I've ever had that specific thought.
Okay.
But it's just really cool that, the fans have been super supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like beyond. And I don't know how I'm going to feel when we get through, delivering all the content, because there's so much more stuff we have to do. We're going to record part 2 of the double album here very shortly. And then we're going to play shows, and, I don't know how to process it all yet. Yeah. I know this is a point of departure for me personally, that a lot of people say this can't be the last thing that you make, and I'm in my brain going, if it can be like this, I want to keep making more music like this. Yeah. What does that look like for Project 86 and the history of the band and all that stuff? Because, so much of, what the legacy of this band is defined by, is earlier, you know what I mean? Yeah. We've done some stuff that's made some waves in more recent history, but there's, it's evolved, it's become something different, and in my brain right now, it's like, albums 1 through 10 were one thought, sort of, when you boil it down. This is a new thought. Point of departure. What does that mean moving forward? Is it a different name? Is it a different thing? Or do I just, am I even going to want to make more once we're all done with this? I don't know. But I try not to leave any door slammed shut. I was proceeding sincerely, thinking things were a certain way, and I've just been surprised and shocked in a really great way, and how all this is. I've never had so much fun making music, and I feel so connected to it, and like the heavier sound, it's just really close to my heart, not to take anything away from stuff that's come in the past, but I just love what's happened here, and I'm really excited for it to drop. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the more I've listened to the record, each time I like it more, and there's something I'm hearing different on it with each listen, and it's really great. Like, it's funny listening through the discography, and it's like you can hear like your screams. It's like that scream on Run, I think it is, on the first record, and it's like on the One Arm Man demo, like you're like, it's there, it's always been there, it's just not unleashed yet.
Yeah, it's just so weird that I sincerely felt like in the studio, it's like, I mean, I painted the picture to you, but I still can't put into words how much I've struggled with my voice over the years. Because the way that I do that shouty sound, I mean, that's kind of like my sound traditionally. It hurts me to sing that way. It hurts my head. It hurts my throat. It hurts my vocal cords. And when I do the heavier sound, it doesn't at all. I can sing like that all day, and I love heavy music. Yeah. I've always desired to do something a little bit more extreme. Yeah. It doesn't sound like what has come out of the name Project 86 in the past. So that's a dilemma, but then again, neither did Rival Factions, neither did Truthless Heroes. There's been a lot of left turns. So I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm just having fun and trying to stay in the moment, trying to live in the now and be thankful and, communicate gratitude towards, every person that's been a part of this or supported it along the way. And that's the most important thing, is that it's seeing people get excited about the music you can't put a value on that. Yeah. It's the most encouraging thing in the whole world when you go check out the comments on your music video and people are just blown away. Yeah. It's just really fun. Yeah.
Is this the first time since Truthless Heroes you've sat down and written conceptually in this way?
No, Knives to the Future, which was our 9th record, was a story. But that's the only other time that I've try to do that. I mean, it's kind of a I don't know what's the term. When you say the word concept, it doesn't evoke good things,
right?
It's not necessarily cool, but I like stories and I like world building. Really, it's the world building that I love. And captivating the imagination or attempting to. So how can I make something that will touch, different pieces of your imagination, maybe, I've always been someone who's a fan of words and I like writing. I like telling stories. So let's write a story. Let's write a real story. Let's use the music as a score, and then let's develop some visuals around it and make it one thing that people can sort of get lost in, hopefully. It's pretty dark. It's also darker than a lot of the stuff that we've done before, and we've done some fairly dark stuff. I mean, this is even more dark. Yeah. So it's fun though. Super fun. I love it. Fade the generator! Your mask of virtue, a fallacy of your light to fade the generator, the cybernetic, the new black, Omni light to fade the generator, a ransom of the analog, that will exchange for synthetic faithlessly.
Thanks for listening to As the Story Grows. Our intro music was written and composed by Jeremy Hunt. The As the Story Grows theme is by Bob Nana. If you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and give us a rating and review. If you'd like to support the show financially, you can join us at patreon.com/asthestorygrows. Be a part of our community and join the ongoing conversation over on Discord. If you enjoy this episode, share it on social media with your friends. Much appreciated, and thanks for listening.